not interested.
christiangeekcentral.com. Do you like games? I like games too. I like games too.
Hi, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. I did not go to Gen Con 2017 this year, but I spent hours scouring and combing through the games that were going to be there to see kind of what was going to catch my interest, particularly in the realm of games that can be played solo and or co-op, because that's really my thing. And so I'm going to present my list of my top 10 solo or co-op games from Gen Con 2017. Now, there's also going to be, in addition to that, a little bit more of a narrow focus. My interests tend to run toward fantasy and sci-fi. I'm an RPG gamer at heart, and so I use board games to scratch that itch a lot of the time. I also really like campaign games that have a continuing story, or that your characters are growing and advancing and becoming more powerful over multiple game sessions. And so those are the kinds of games that I'm going to tend to gravitate toward. Not all of the games on my top 10 list fit that category, but I would say most of them do. So without any further blah blah blah, let's get to it. I do want to hit some quick honorable mentions. First would be Witches of the Revolution. This was an interesting game to me just thematically. It's described as a cooperative game where you and your fellow players lead covens of witches determined to see a fledgling nation achieve freedom from tyranny. I'm definitely not supporting the idea that we should burn those who practice Wicca at the stake or anything like that. It's interesting, though, this does seem like a knee-jerk reaction to the opposite of that, where it's, you know, kind of like glorifying the practice of witchcraft in the real world, you know, and I think there's a distinct difference between witchcraft as it's handled in fantasy and witchcraft as it's handled in the real world. This seems to be drawing a lot from witchcraft as it is presented in fantasy, but then setting it kind of in the real world. The description at the beginning reads, "The colonies of the Americas were a haven for the persecuted, but now there's a war for independence, and those who would have freedom must fight for it." So this is taking place in some version of our world. It's just it's a weird kind of like muddying of the waters regarding the topic of real world witchcraft versus fantasy witchcraft, and you know, so I would really be interested in opening up the box and just kind of taking a look at it. Maybe it would be a fun game mechanically. I have no idea. I wouldn't be opposed to playing it, but I'm just like, this is really interesting. What if anything, are you hoping to say or do through the themes of this game? But anyway, so that's mostly on my honorable mentions because it's a curiosity. The rest of these honorable mentions I'll go through quickly. Sword and Sorcery: Immortal Souls. I bought the game before Gen Con. I've really been enjoying it. You can actually check out my playthrough video series of the first couple of quests in this game on the YouTube channel. Hostage Negotiator: Crime Wave. I'm very interested in this. It's strictly, from what I understand, a one-player game where you are trying to talk like a psychopath down from killing his hostages or blowing up a building or whatever their crazy thing is they're going to do. So just thematically, I find that very interesting, and so I want to check that one out some more. Thunderstone Quest. I was a big fan of Thunderstone for a while, especially the epic variant, but after getting exposed to Pathfinder the Adventure card game, that really replaced what Thunderstone was for me as kind of like a card-based RPG campaign type of experience. And, you know, Thunderstone, the original, didn't have a campaign. Thunderstone Quest does, but at the same time, as I look at how the mechanics are working, I kind of think that Pathfinder is still going to be scratching my kind of tabletop card-based RPG itch better than this one will. Storm Hollow, a storyboard game. I'm always looking for games that I can play with my boys who are 6 and 9, going on 7 and 10, and this looks like it could totally fit that bill. The age range is a little bit on the young side, and so I've actually got a game on my actual top 10 list that replaced this one, which is why it didn't make the list in the end. Secrets of the Lost Station. This is another one that looks really interesting to me. It's mixing sci-fi and fantasy, or excuse me, mostly sci-fi, but then also some like Cthulhu mythos type of stuff, you know, set on a space station, kind of like a derelict space station. And there is another game on my list that actually bumped this one out that has a very similar theme, but just looks a lot more cool and dark and just right up my alley. And then lastly, Wasteland Express Delivery Service. This one, I'm just interested in a pick up and deliver game that can kind of like work for me. I'm not naturally drawn to pick up and deliver games. Merchant of Venus is pretty cool, but it's a little bit random in terms of the movement on the board, so I'd like something that there's a little bit more control over. And I'm a big fan of Mad Max, especially Fury Road, and this looks like it could scratch some of my post-apocalyptic driving itches on the gaming table. But it doesn't technically advertise itself as a game that can be played solo or co-op. I just assume that it probably can be because it seems to be based on a victory point system for your winning conditions, and usually those can be converted without much difficulty into at least cooperative games, if not solo games. And so my hope would be that I could do that with this game, but I don't know at the end of the day, which is why it's not on my top 10 list. All right, now with those out of the way, let's get to the actual top 10 list. Number 10. The World of Smog, Rise of Moloch is my number 10, and the description reads, The World of Smog, Rise of Moloch is a Victorian adventure board game for 2 to 5 players set in an alternate England where magic and technology have taken an extraordinary turn. Playable as a campaign or solo adventures, Rise of Moloch puts one player in the position of the nemesis against the intrepid gentleman, controlled by the other players trying to save the crown. Secretly activate the order of your characters through different scenarios, enjoy your steam power weapons, and save your special actions for the most opportune moments. You surely don't want to make your opponent stronger. Rise of Moloch is a campaign-driven adventure played over a series of missions, each telling part of the overall story of Moloch's rise to power, or defeat at the hands of the fearless gentleman. Each mission features a unique board setup and goals for both the Nemesis player and Gentleman players to complete. More so, subsequent missions will be impacted by the outcome of the one before it, weaving the overall story and gameplay together to make each campaign unique. Players will each control one or more of the intrepid gentleman, or in the case of the Nemesis player, cunning agents and minions, all with unique powers and upgrades they will utilize to complete the various goals of each mission. This sounds right up my alley, at least for sure, like 5 to 10 years ago, when I was still in more of a board gaming rhythm of having time to fit into my schedule of playing with other people. I don't have as much flexibility with that, and when I do, they don't always want to play the same kind of games that I want to play, and so that's why I'm leaning more towards solo right now in this season of my life. But anyway, I love like Hero Quest. I love First Edition Descent. I love those kinds of games that have a game master type of role who's controlling the monsters and setting the tone and the theme and all that kind of stuff and creating challenges for the other players. I love those kinds of games, and I've never played one with a steampunk setting, and I'm not like a huge fan of steampunk, but I'm always looking for something that will fit a certain niche in my board game collection, and specifically in various kinds of themes. And this one looks like it could be really cool. I love the design of the miniatures. I love all the artwork that I'm seeing. It mentions that there's these goals for both the Nemesis player and the hero players, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. Descent Second Edition introduced that kind of concept, and it kind of felt like almost like tag, like or capture the flag. I mean, where like bad guys and good guys are running past each other, and they're only fighting each other when they have to. I much prefer these kinds of dungeon crawly, game master and heroes types of games, where hey, every time it's pretty simple. You're going through an area, you're crawling, you're getting loot and stuff, and then you fight a big bad at the end. It's a really simple recipe, but it's one that really works for me, and I don't know if this is going to have that kind of feel, or so there's just a lot of unknowns. That's why it's not closer to number 1 on my list, and also because it can't, to my mind, be played completely cooperatively or completely solo. So, but it's definitely one that I will still keep on my radar, and I'll look forward to hearing more about. World of Smog: Rise of Moloch is listed as coming out in 2017. Right now, it has a pre-order price of $85. Believe it or not, that is on the cheaper half of the games on this list. So, getting a little steep, still doable, but again, it's probably not the one that I'm going to want right now. Number 9 is Fallout, coming out in 2017 by the end of the year, they say, with an MSRP of $60, which is definitely much more in my price range. This is advertised as being for 1 to 4 players with a hefty playing time of 120 to 180 minutes. The description reads, Fallout is a post-nuclear adventure board game for 1 to 4 players. Based on the hit video game series by Bethesda Softworks, each Fallout scenario is inspired by a familiar story from the franchise. Survivors begin the game on the edge of an unexplored landscape, uncertain of what awaits them in this unfamiliar world. With just one objective to guide them from the very beginning, each player must explore the hidden map, fight ferocious enemies, and build the skills of their survivor as they attempt to complete challenging quests and balance feuding factions within the game. As they advance their survivors' stories, players come across new quests and individual targets, leading them to gain influence. Who comes out ahead depends on how keenly and aggressively each player ventures through the game. However, if a single faction is pushed to power too quickly, the wasteland will be taken for their own, and the survivors conquered along with it. This was really in one of the kind of the video demos that I watched described as like an open sandbox kind of game in the same way that the Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 4 have been, where really, you have an objective, yes, but you can also just go around on the board and do whatever the crap you want. It looks like it definitely has some, there's definitely some combat involved. They have like a version of the VAT system represented on the dice by having different, faces of the dice show the little VATS guy, the little special guy, and then like parts of his body highlighted and stuff. So for certain enemies, you have to try and hit certain parts of their body and stuff. So thematically, it looks like it's really pulling all the right things from the Fallout video games. It's not higher on, it's not closer to number 1 on my list because I feel like I've already got some like sci-fi kind of combat games. I've got Galaxy Defenders, I've got Doom, the board game, which I'm just now getting back into like a solo play of, and I don't know if I really need to scratch any more of my like futuristic combat itch. Yes, it's post-apocalyptic, and that's very cool, but it's also a little bit more of an overworld type of adventure where you're going. It's a zoomed-out experience where you're traveling across a big map, a large land, and you have combat and stuff, but it's not like this tactical combat within a like a building or a room or something like that, like you would find in a dungeon crawl, and that does tend to be the thing that I tend to be more into. I don't know. I still am open to learning more about it, seeing how it plays and stuff like that. And of course, thematically, I'm a big fan of Fallout, so this is definitely going to catch my interest. But and the $60 asking price is like totally reasonable. It feels like that's getting more and more rare that like nice hefty games have a price of just $60 to $70 these days. So for all those reasons, it definitely earns a place on my list. Number 8. Stuffed Fables from Plaid Hat Games. This also has an asking price of $60 coming by the end of 2017. Listed as being for 2 to 4 players, 60 to 90 minutes, ages 7 and up. So this is the game I was talking about that might be a good fit for me and my boys. The description reads, Stuffed Fables is an unusual adventure game in which players take on the roles of brave stuffies seeking to save the child they love from a scheming, evil mastermind. Make daring melee attacks, leap across conveyor belts, or even steer a racing wagon down a peril-filled hill. The game delivers a thrilling narrative driven by player choices. Players explore a world of wonder and danger, unlocking curious discoveries. The chapters of Stuffed Fables explore the many milestones of a child's life, creating a memorable tale ideal for families, as well as groups of adults who haven't forgotten their childlike sense of wonder. Stuffed Fables is the first adventure book game, a new product line from Plaid Hat Games in which all of the action takes place in the unique storybook, a book that acts as your rules reference, story guide, and game board all in one. Each adventure in the game takes place over several pages of the immersive adventure book. The book opens flat onto the table to reveal a colorful map or other illustration central to playing the game, with choices, story, and special rules on the opposite page. On their turn, a player draws 5 dice from the bag. The colors of the dice drawn determine the types of actions and options available to the player. White dice can restuff stuffies injured in battle. Red dice perform melee attacks, while green dice perform ranged attacks. Yellow dice search, while blue dice are used for special actions, and purple dice can be used as any color. Most dice can always find a strategic use, including moving, using items, or contributing to group tasks. Players can store dice for later, combine dice for stronger actions, or use them one at a time for multiple activations. As turns go by, black dice are also drawn, and after enough appear, minions emerge or attack, and the dice bag is reset. Players can encourage each other by sharing dice or their precious stuffing. In addition to fighting minions, each page of the storybook offers numerous points of interest, charming characters to interact or trade with, as well as many unusual challenges. And each page is but one chapter that folds into a branching, overarching story with a multitude of items and a special discovery deck full of surprises. I really like the idea of a fully cooperative game to play with my boys. If you're a parent, you might know that any time that you can get your kids to play together nicely, it's a good day. And I really like cooperative games as well. And so the chance for us all to kind of be in the game together instead of, like, say, me running the game, but I can actually team up with my boys and still be in kind of like this fantasy environment is really a cool idea to me. Now, it does look kind of like, childlike and, and kind of innocent and stuff, and my tastes tend to run toward the dark and grim when it comes to fantasy and science fiction. But something about the art design and the miniatures is endearing to me, is maybe slightly haunting to me, it's interesting to me. It doesn't strike me as silly. It strikes me as, even though it's sweet, it's kind of taking itself seriously in a funny way. I can't quite put my finger on it. But anyway, this is a game that definitely has my attention. That's Stuffed Fables, coming by the end of this year with an asking price of $60 from Plaid Hat Games.
Number 7.
Okay, despite this one not being closer to number 1 on my list, it's actually the one that I might be most likely to buy, largely because of its asking price, which is only $20. One Deck Dungeon, Forest of Shadows, is it's a standalone expansion. You can treat it as a standalone game or an expansion to the game One Deck Dungeon, which also released its 1.5 version at Gen Con or around Gen Con or something. I don't know, this summer. And I actually got my hands on the 1.5 version of One Deck Dungeon when I went on vacation about a month and a half ago. And it's this little box, and it's got this great dungeon crawl in it that you can play cooperatively with 2 players or just solo by yourself. And I really enjoy it. It's kind of a dice allocation system where you're going through a dungeon and you're rolling dice, and you have different colored dice that each color corresponds to a certain stat, like, say, your melee ability or your ranged ability or your dexterity ability or your magic ability or whatever, and you have to roll dice and cover certain, like, challenge boxes that of a certain color type. So if you're fighting, like, if you're facing a trap, then you're going to have more challenge boxes that you have to cover, that match the dexterity color, and you have to cover them with a certain high enough number and stuff. And so thematically it really works, but it's also a bit of like a brain teasing puzzle, almost like a really light version of, say, Mage Knight, where you have these resources at your disposal. You roll your dice or whatever. You have, there's much more randomness in the rolling of the dice in this than Mage Knight, but you're looking at these resources and you're like, okay, how can I put these in the right spots and use them to fuel the right actions and to create the right bonuses, because you can also trigger bonuses and character abilities that you have with the dice that you've rolled, so how can I use all these resources in this puzzle to defeat this monster while taking the least amount of damage, because every challenge box that you don't cover can potentially do damage or something bad to you. And so it's a really clever way of taking a single deck of cards and having on each card the ability for it to act as an enemy, a piece of loot, a bit of experience. They're modular. They can be used in all these different ways. And so in this really compact way, you have this great little brain-teasing dungeon crawl that I think thematically really works well too, despite it having kind of like that puzzly type of element. And so now One Deck Dungeon, what's it called? Forest of Shadows, which is listed for release at 2017. Let's see here. And oh yeah, you can pre-order this now, and it will arrive for those who pre-order it sometime in September. So gosh, I may actually order it as soon as I'm done recording this video. But the description reads, One Deck Dungeon is a card game roguelike, a dungeon delve that is different every time, difficult to survive, with a character you build up from scratch. The deck consists of various foes to combat and other perils from the dungeon. Each card depicts both the obstacles to overcome and the potential rewards for doing so. When you defeat a card, you claim it as either experience, an item, or a skill, tucking it under the appropriate side of your character card to show its benefits. The longer you take exploring the dungeon, the deeper you'll delve, and the difficulty will scale up quickly. If you make it far enough, you'll have to fight the dungeon boss. Survive, and you'll be a legend. One Deck Dungeon Forest of Shadows is a standalone expansion for One Deck Dungeon that contains new heroes, new dungeons, new perils, new foes, and new mechanisms, poison, and event perils. It can be combined with the original game for a hybrid dungeon experience with the heroes and dungeons being compatible with the original or played on its own. And I should add that at least in the 1.5 version of One Deck Dungeon, they've added campaign rules. That's the big selling point for me. If it was just a roguelike where like every game I was starting from scratch, that wouldn't be as fun for me. But with the campaign rules, you actually can earn experience and you can keep some of your bonuses from game to game and progress and build your character over many game sessions. Totally my thing. This isn't a game that I'm going to be finding myself playing all the time, but it is that rare and beautiful board game that I can take with me when I'm going on vacation somewhere. And we go and visit a family about twice a year out of town, and this is like the game that I've been looking for to bring along with me for those times. So anyway, One Deck Dungeon in the 1.5 rules, and One Deck Dungeon Forest of Shadows, the standalone expansion for it. Again, it's available for pre-order for an asking price of $20. Number 6. Apocrypha, the adventure card game, coming out in 2017 with an asking price of, let's see here, about $100, which is, okay, well, I think I can handle that, but is it going to be worth it for me? Thematically, this is one of the things that is jumping out to me most about this game. I mean, first off, it's made by the guy who designed the Pathfinder adventure card game, which I've really been enjoying, but my pace through that game, I play it with a buddy about twice a year, and so we're still on that first basic box, Rise of the Rune Lords, and haven't finished all the expansions for it yet. So taking on another one of those, like, oh my gosh. But I do like the mechanisms of that game, how that game runs, and so to have some kind of like a modern supernatural, kind of setting with similar mechanisms, that sounds like a really cool thing to me. Also, in terms of the theme, the first box of the Apocrypha game series is called The World, and it's going to be followed by The Flesh and the Devil, which are traditionally thought of as the world, the flesh, and the devil are thought of in Christian theology as the kind of like the enemies of our life in Christ, and it may be taken from Ephesians chapter 2 verses 1 through 3. It's not really clear, but somehow the world, the flesh, and the devil kind of became these three things that are paired together that basically we as believers are up against. And so I don't suspect that this game is created from a biblical Christian point of view. Probably more from a traditional, maybe even by someone from a Catholic background or something like that. I'm not really clear, so I don't know how really biblically based it's going to be. It's probably going to be, if anything, more based on the trappings of Christianity than the actual content of Christianity. Anyway, the description here reads: the Apocrypha adventure card game allows you to play it as a cooperative card game or with a game master as a role-playing game. The world is on the brink of an apocalypse, set in motion by monsters only your characters can see. Gameplay is story-based and features deck construction and character growth. Over time, characters will unlock repressed memory fragments that will add new powers. Each mission has a unique setup and goal, which often involves hunting down a true threat hiding among the cards at the nexuses. Is that the plural for nexus? I don't know, whatever. They probably know more than I do. The nexuses that the characters investigate. So already it sounds like you're kind of going to these locations like you did in Pathfinder, and in each location you're hunting down, drawing through that deck, encountering cards until you encounter the big bad or whatever that you're trying to get to. The game will be released in a box set that will contain one chapter expansion. The base game, called The World, comes with 584 cards, 26-sided dice, one rulebook, one storybook, 30 dividers, and 10 character stand-up tokens. The remaining 8 chapters will appear in 2 expansions, The Flesh and the Devil, each with 400 cards, 10 dividers, 1 storybook, and 4 character stand-up tokens. So I'm really interested in this. One thing that the designer mentioned in an interview is that this game kind of takes place in real time, as it were. So when you sit down to play the game for the first time, let's say you do that on September 15th of this year, then in your game story, it is September 15th, 2017. And so I'm not sure exactly how it keeps track of time, but he was talking about the idea that they will be able to create events that they'll publicize on their website and stuff that will actually change the content and what is going on in the game as you sit down to play it, if you are keeping tabs with their updates on their website or or whatever. So it's got kind of some interesting elements to it, both mechanically and thematically, that really make it interesting to me. And I've already really enjoyed, as I said, the Pathfinder Adventure card game. I think there's a good chance that I'll enjoy this one. But again, because I'm not done with the Pathfinder Adventure card game, I don't feel like I can put this one closer to number 1 on my list. And Apocrypha, the adventure card game, is actually available right now for $100. Number 5. Boom! Mother trucker! Folklore The Affliction, available in, what is it, September, I think? Yeah, September, with an asking price of $100, 1 to 5 players, 90 to 120 minutes playing time. The description reads, embark on a cooperative epic adventure that is Folklore The Affliction. Find and destroy the source of the evil spreading its claws into the heart of the land, decimating its people and resources. Free the denizens from the scourge of vampirism and lycanthropy, and expand your power and abilities. Are you a survivor, or will you play as your ghost? Will you fall to the bloodlust or the taint of lycanthropy yourself? Folklore The Affliction is an expandable, ongoing horror RPG board game for 1 to 5 players that focuses on immersive storyline, strategic combat, character development, and intense character customization elements. Ooh-hoo-hoo. Your successes and failures, encounters and challenges can affect the entire group, raising the ante and fueling interaction. Play one of 6 customizable and unique characters in a quest to gain lore by conquering the supernatural afflictions. Travel the land and enter dark locations where the action becomes a miniature-based dungeon crawl. Uncover deep and more intriguing storylines as you go further into darkness in your quest to drive the evil back into the hell it came from. Dying in Folklore is not the end for your character. Dead characters play on as their ghost with ethereal powers to strike down your foes from beyond the grave. You are never truly out of the action. Customizable abilities even include those that can strengthen your character in the afterlife. So this looks really cool. It's one that does not require a game master, but you can have this big dark fantasy adventure. I really do like dark fantasy. That's, I'm a big fan of that. And you have both the overworld experience, and in one of the demos that I saw, there's kind of a rule book that's giving you choices and options, and so there's a little bit of choose your own adventure kind of in the storybook. And then you have kind of like these zoomed in dungeon crawl things, but they mostly seem to be like dungeon skirmishes. I didn't get the sense that they were dungeon crawls where you were really exploring a labyrinth of rooms. It's like, okay, we're going to zoom in, and now it's in this little clearing in the forest, or now it's in this little open spot in the dungeon, or something like that. So the reason this one isn't closer to number 1 on my list, despite it looking really cool and so right up my alley, and with a fairly reasonable price of $100. I mean, it's saying that you can buy it for $71.99 on Cool Stuff Inc., but you got to factor shipping into that too. So anyway, I've got Sword and Sorcery right now, which has a lot of those same elements, including even like still being a part of the game, even if your character gets killed while you're a ghost before you respawn. So, but that said, I want to know more. Tell me more so I can get a sense of like how this is unique from Sword and Sorcery and other dungeon crawls or other adventure games and stuff. Already I like the theme, and that sets it apart a bit for me from other fantasy games, because it's going with a much darker, almost like Ravenloft, vampires, werewolves, that type of dark fantasy feel. So it definitely has my interest, but for those other reasons, that's why it's not closer to my number 1. Number 4! Dude, if you haven't seen Big Trouble in Little China, you gotta stop this video right now and make that happen. It is a classic, weird 80s sci-fi, much more fantasy, adventure, comedy, great fish out of water action story. Anyway, if you're a fan of Big Trouble in Little China, then this might be on your radar. It certainly is on mine. It's described as let's see here. Well, let's read the description. There is a secret world where ancient evil weaves a modern mystery. They call it Little China. It's where Big Trouble was waiting for Jack Burton and his friends as they uncover an ancient diabolical plot. The evil minions of the immortal ghost sorcerer Lo Pan are waiting to chop down the players with axes and guns in dark alleys and all throughout the battle-torn streets of Chinatown. Now Jack, Wang, Gracie, and the rest of the gang must muster up all of their courage, survive against hordes of baddies, and then face off in a showdown with the darkest demon of them all, all, Lo Pan. Big Trouble in Little China, the game, sends you and up to 3 other players on a wild adventure to experience the unknown and mystical underworld of Chinatown. Each brave character uses their own unique talents and abilities to take on various missions throughout Little China, working together to gain enough audacity to take down Lo Pan, the 3 Storms, and a slew of other powerful henchmen in this cooperative, replayable, cinematic experience. You will venture through the iconic locations in Chinatown, saving the helpless and thwarting evil plans, all while discovering weapons and rare magics to use to your benefit. Player actions are powered by thematic dice that are rolled each round. These dice will be used to take part in combat, testing your luck, taking audacious actions, and getting players in and out of big trouble. But beware, roll bad luck and suffer the consequences. The clock's ticking as Lo Pan inches closer to breaking the curse and regaining his mortal form. The heroes are thrown into a final showdown with Lo Pan and his most elite bodyguards to finally put an end to his reign of terror. You'll need all your guts and glory to rescue the green-eyed beauty, defeat ancient magic, and save Chinatown in Big Trouble in Little China, the game. All right, so there's a few nits I could pick on the just the kind of the writing style, like, oh, Big Trouble, oh, you know, whatever. But what I've seen of this game, it looks, the miniatures look great, and it's described as, you know, yes, cooperative, but also this another kind of sandbox type of game where you just kind of go around the city and you do all these crazy things that help you build up your ability so that you can take on Lo Pan before time runs out. This one is, let's see, when is this available? I think it's November. Yeah, November, with an asking price of about $100, which, you know, is probably, with shipping involved, maybe closer to like 70 or something like that, without shipping. Well, yeah, actually, I'm not sure, because when I went to the website, they're selling it for $100. You can pre-order it for $100, and $100 gets you either the retail version or the deluxe, like, pre-order version, which comes with like additional kind of like game story content and a campaign mode. I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? You're only going to give the campaign mode to the people who kind of like risk buying what could end up being a completely crappy game before, you know, reviews and stuff like that are out. So I am not a fan of that. I think if you're going to have a campaign mode, you should put that in the retail version of the game. That should not be behind some kind of like a risky paywall kind of thing. Hopefully, after the game is out, they will put they will at least put the campaign rules on their website or something like that, because that would be a major draw for me to play this game. Still, even without the campaign option, it does seem to have like a lot of things that I would really enjoy. I love Big Trouble in Little China, and so this one almost feels like a no-brainer to me, but at the same time, you know, I don't know, you know, how long that novelty would really last for me once I get it on the table and play the game. So I really need to kind of see reviews and stuff like that. And that campaign thing would be really important for me, but I'm such a big fan of the movie that I'm really feeling drawn to this. But anyway, for the reasons that I mentioned, that's why it's not quite closer to my number one. That's Big Trouble in Little China, the game, coming in November for probably about $70 to $100. Number 3, Nemos War 2nd Edition, coming, let's see, I think this is available now, actually, for about $75 plus probably some shipping. This is 2nd Edition, and this comes from Victory Point Games, who historically is not known for having like great looking components and great looking games and stuff, but they seem to be kind of taking a turn in the direction of really having nice components, and their republishing of this game, it certainly seems to be an indication of that. All the stuff that I've seen for it, the art and the components and stuff, it looks really cool. This is based on, you know, Jules Verne's classic novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The description reads that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea tells the story of Captain Nemo and his astounding ship, the Nautilus. The 2nd edition of Nemos War, Victory Point Games' popular solitaire offering from designer Chris Taylor, is a greatly enhanced greatly enhanced offering featuring offering. Okay, so offering is a noun here. Is a greatly enhanced offering featuring mass production printing and amazing Ian O'Toole art and graphics throughout. Set in the year 1870, you set sail in this amazing electric-powered submarine, assuming the role and motive of Captain Nemo as you travel across the seas on missions of science, exploration, anti-imperialism, and war. With this supercharged 2nd edition of Nemo's War, prepare yourself for the adventure of a lifetime. I've never read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. From what I've heard about, like, the character of Nemo, is that he seems to be either inconsistently written or just written in an unusual way so that it's hard to pin down what his motive is, which means that he can be thought of as either a hero or a villain, and this game really gives you the opportunity to take whatever path you want. You know, if you have an agenda for liberating people and, you know, doing good things like that on this kind of global scale, then you can go globetrotting and do that kind of stuff, or you can do ship-to-ship combat and be much more of a mercenary and stuff. But you have this kind of, it's a kind of a global open sandbox that you can approach however you want. You're going to be upgrading your ship. You're going to be using resources, including your crewmates and your own just kind of personal energy reserves. You know, if I remember correctly, you know, if you like expend enough of your reserves, you kind of just start to go nuts, you know, and things can totally go haywire. And then, you know, victory points, as the publisher implies, are counted up at the end to determine success or failure. This one stands out to me because it looks like a really cool solitaire game. It's got a bit of a steampunk vibe, which, as I mentioned, I don't really have a steampunk game in my collection. It's kind of an open sandbox so I really appreciate just kind of being set loose to do whatever I want and approach gameplay however I want. And so for all those reasons, it's number 3. But I would say that because I'm not familiar with the Jules Verne license and stuff, and I also wonder, you know, is this the artwork, even though it looks appropriate to the period, will it feel a little stale when I actually get it in front of me and I'm actually playing the game, or will it be lively and rich enough for me? What will that actual experience be like? Those questions lingering in my mind are why it's not closer to number 1 on my list. So again, that's Nemos War 2nd Edition, available now for $75 to $100 or so. Number 2. Deep Madness was so close to being number 1 on my list. It's going to be coming out in 2017 sometime, nothing more specific than that, with an asking price of $190. $190. Oh man. I spent $180 to get my hands on a copy of Gloomhaven, and that ended up not being the experience that I wanted it to be. So it's hard for me to want to risk that kind of money on another board game anytime soon. That said, this it really looks like it would be my kind of thing. The description reads, in a dark and claustrophobic deep-sea mining site, the uncovering of a mysterious sphere is dragging everyone nearby into the endless madness. The fears deep within one's mind are amplified and transformed into horrifying monsters from other dimensions, torturing one's body and testing their sanity. Only those with extraordinary will and conviction can escape its devastating grasp. Deep Madness is a fully cooperative board game for 1 to 6 players with 66 amazingly detailed miniatures depicting a sci-fi horror world inspired by Lovecraft's work and the Alien series. In the game, players assume the roles of investigators venturing into the seemingly empty yet perilous deep-sea mining site to find out the truth behind the Lost Contact event. Unimaginable horror and madness from the dark fear within. Okay, so again, we got like a noun. Okay. Unimaginable horror and madness from the dark fear within is waiting. Deep Madness is based on multiple scenarios from a continuous storyline. Ta-ding! Each scenario has its own unique board setup, rules, special effects, and goals. From resolving fatal crises to struggling with overwhelming bosses, the investigators will face various quests filled with strategical decisions. Strategical? Would that just be strategic? I don't know. And fierce combat. With each scenario achieved, they are one step closer to the truth, but also one step deeper into the world of madness. Each scenario of the game plays in a limited number of game rounds. If the investigators fail to achieve the goals before the last round ends, the game is lost, and everyone is consumed. In the game, investigators battle the horrific monsters, survive the harsh crises, and above all, save their own minds from the devouring of madness. The reason this thing has me most excited is it's essentially a dungeon crawl that matches like Arkham Horror and kind of like the Cthulhu, like crazy Lovecraftian, we're going insane monsters from other dimensions type of stuff. That kind of theme with like a derelict sunken submarine, you know, like those horror movies where people are going through like this sunken ship and who knows what crazy monsters around the corner and water's leaking all over the place and stuff. And in this game you even have to like survive in rooms that are submerged, and so you have a limited amount of oxygen that you can use, you know, as you're moving around. And so there's both threat to be physically devoured and like mentally devoured. So it's just this great cool mashup of those two types of horror that really have captured my attention here. There's a lot of questions I have about like how the game will actually feel when it plays. So I mean, I'll definitely, and especially with that asking price, holy crap, I'm going to have to wait until I can see, some gameplay and some reviews of this. But my gosh, this one, Deep Madness, really stuck out to me. If not for that asking price, oof, if this was a $70 game, this would probably be #1 on my list. But it's not. Instead, #1! Battle Stations 2nd edition. This one is coming in 2017 with actually August of 2017. So this month, who knows, they don't have much time left. Maybe it's available now. I better go check. With an asking price of $100. The original edition, first edition, I think came out in 2004, which I have not played. I have no experience with. This one is listed as being 1 to 6 players, and it's 60 to 240 minutes in play length, so that's a pretty broad range. The description reads, 2 obstacles to interstellar flight were solved in the 22nd century, hyperdrives to actually get us to other planets, and cloning technology to replace our bodies and brains from backups in the inevitable situation something goes wrong on the trip. Peacetime advancements released the vast resources of a sea of stars like a cosmic piñata. We need capable explorers. The more dangers that present themselves, the more opportunities for lowly travelers to ascend to become true heroes. There's a lot of emergencies happening on board your ship. Will you be a hero when the time arises? Battle Stations is a tabletop starship simulator, a multi-map board game that simultaneously features ship action in space and the events on board the ships involved in the conflicts. It is also a role-playing game in which your characters grow throughout campaigns, picking up experience points, upgrades, and new abilities. The game rules are very simple, but they allow for complex RPG-like imaginative choices, like teleporting to an enemy ship, hacking their helm controls, and steering their ship towards a black hole before ejecting yourself out the airlock. Inside the box is an infinity of alien worlds to explore, rickety spacecrafts to upgrade, and a rowdy crew of lifelong comrades to adventure with. One player takes on the role of the enemy and works against the other players who are cooperating with each other. Now, for a while, this was not #1 on my list because I didn't know that it was available as a solo experience as well. But with the announcement that this can be played solo, which they're not saying very much about yet, I haven't found a whole lot about how solo play works, which is why this is not. It's #1 on my list, absolutely, but it's not an insta-buy because of that. But everything else says to me, yes, this is a game that you absolutely have to have in your collection at some point, because I don't have any kind of starship simulation type of board game. I've got some sci-fi games, I've got some fantasy games, but nothing that takes place on a starship. Having those kinds of Star Trek or Farscape or Battlestar Galactica types of adventures that I would love to simulate on the tabletop. And the fact that it bills itself as having simple rules and yet this marvelous amount of complexity so that you can have all these kinds of crazy scenarios play out, that's super, super appealing to me. This edition, the tiles look great, the miniatures look great. Now, the base game is $100. And there's an advanced rule book that just has tons more advanced rules and complexity and adventures and stuff like that. And that's like a bunch more dollars more, like maybe 40, 50, I don't know. I remember thinking, oh, that's a lot, But this, to start with, just sounds fantastic. And if it functions for me as advertised, then I'll absolutely, a few months, down the line, go and get the advanced rulebook to get the full experience out of this game. So, but for me, because I don't have any kind of game like Battle Stations describes itself as, that's why it is absolutely #1 on my list. So I'd love to hear what kind of board games, tabletop games you're interested in, any new games that are coming out or that you've heard about that you're excited about. I'd love to hear about in the comments below. Then I hope you'll join us sometime soon at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.